Ladies and gentlemen, we are just 2 short weeks away from finding out what Fat Shark has been cooking for us and what the 6th playable character class for Darktide is going to be. And that means it's high time that I start speculating on what that class will be upon the reveal. Last time around, with the Arbites reveal, I was able to guess the Arbites from the teaser trailer, showcasing the first person's perspective of the dog running across the bridge, and I was even able to go so far as figuring out what some of the abilities would be from there, and that was pretty cool to be able to do that. This time around, there's a lot less information out there. There's only a few scant pieces of credible information, and I'm going to be laying those out in today's video and hopefully making a case for why I think I might have figured out what the 6th playable character class is. This first video is going to be all about showing you my work, showing you the evidence that I've been able to find, and then connecting that together to point towards the ultimate class that I think is going to be added. But that's not all I want to get into about this class, because I also want to explore the lore implications of our 6th class. I think that this class, much more so than the Arbites, is going to be intimately connected with the story that's ongoing, especially the current event in-game, and that means I'll be needing to get some help. That's why I'm recruiting the lore mistress of Darktide herself, Joe Plays Games, to come and help me figure out how this class would help resolve some of the struggles that we're currently facing in Tertium. And then finally, I'm taking it back to the realm of speculation, trying to figure out mechanically how would this class play? What sort of weapons would they bring to bear, and what sort of role would they play in a team in a game of Darktide? As a reminder, if you're not yet subscribed, please help me reach Warhammer 40k subs. I would greatly appreciate your support. And let's begin with one simple word: broker. That's right, broker. Just that one word is all we have to go off so far. But I think it's a pretty good word. It points us in a certain definitive direction. You might be wondering, how do you know that this word is trustworthy? How is this made certain that it's good information? Well, we can't be absolutely certain, but this word was released as part of a data mine that was done over 6 months ago, and attached to it in this data mine was something much more pressing on the player's mind at the time: the name, or rather the code name of the 5th class, Adamant, which ultimately ended up being the Arbites. And Adamant is in fact still in the game files. It's the prefix on all the abilities and talents if you go in the game's code. So that actually did pay off and prove to be true, which makes me think that whatever the 6th class is will be codenamed Broker and will ultimately be coded as Broker in the game files. So I think this is a very, very highly likely to be a legitimate leak of what is coming our way. Now, what does this mean though, is the next question. A cursory search of the terms broker and Darktide, or perhaps even data mine, will lead you to this Reddit post, which is conjecturing that perhaps this leak refers to a Kroot kill broker. A Kroot is a Xenos species that have roughly a Ogren level of stature, and they are humanoid configuration. So from a mechanical standpoint, this is an creature or an ally that could be added to the game, could work within Darktide's mechanical systems. However, I think where this really strange credulity is in the story connectivity. If we harken back to the Arbites was a mandate from Games Workshop to be added as part of the Skulls event, and you can tell that the writers of Darktide did their absolute best to justify how these Arbites are now taking control over an Inquisitor's ship. It really doesn't work like that generally, so that was something they had to work around and really leverage their story writing skills to justify that. I think they worked it out pretty well. However, pulling a Xenos in to be part of the fold and join the warband, especially lore-wise, a whole crew of Xenos will be on board the ship, would be really, really far afield, because we have seen almost zero mention of Xenos in the storyline so far. There's been some whispers here and there. There's some references to them in some of the item descriptions and in some ancillary content for the game. But as far as mainline content and mainline story in the game, we have not touched on Xenos at all. So bringing Xenos in here would be kind of crazy at this point, I think. Not that it wouldn't be a cool idea for the future. The other reason I think this is highly, highly spurious as far as being reliable is the fact that if you just search broker and 40k, this is like the first and only thing that comes up. That is to say that I think that's probably what the poster on this Reddit post did. Also, I think it would be a little bit crazy if Fat Shark were to think that the acceptable code name for this super secret class was something that included a word that is directly in the faction of the unit that you're going to add to the game. That seems a little bit on the nose for my taste. And in fact, I think the simplest way to show exactly what I mean about the association between this word and whatever class is ultimately going to get added is by looking at this analogy. Hey, you guys remember this from the SATs, right? Well, if adamant referred to the Arbites, then the same relationship or a similar relationship should exist between the word broker and whatever our mystery class is. So that is the sort of affiliation we're going with here. Adamant describes the Arbites perhaps because he is a tank-focused class. That's how initially he was designed. Perhaps they recorded some of his voice lines before they even started drawing up designs for the class, and they recorded, "I am Adamant." And they were like, hell yeah, that's what the codename for the class is going to be. Who knows what the connective tissue is there. And in fact, I did a lot of research trying to figure out exactly if there was some sort of pre-existing lore connection between the phrase adamant and the Arbites as a unit, and there isn't any. Darktide, if there was, Darktide's search results have completely erased it from existence at this point. So that means that we really don't have too much to go off of other than what the word broker could mean. To figure out what this word might mean, we need to turn back to our SAT skills, guys. You all thought that was going to be useless after high school. How wrong you were. Here we are in 2025, and yeah, we need to go to the dang thesaurus to look up what a broker might also mean in this context. And as Merriam-Webster says, the most accurate synonyms to the word broker are negotiator, mediator, intermediary, agent, ambassador, middleman, liaison, attorney, buffer, peacemaker, or conciliator. And there's some partial matches to moderator, intercessor, negotiant, advisor, envoy, go-between, referee even. Right? Maybe it's like a ref. I mean, maybe we're getting sports added to the game. Who knows? But that's what I'm saying, guys. These words point us in a certain direction, and what you should be starting to get a picture of in your head is if broker is at all indicative of what the class is supposed to be as their role, instead of it just being something they say like, oh, I'm a bit broker today than I was yesterday. Like if they say that as one of their voice lines, then this is all just right out the fucking window. But if this is pointing us towards the role this character plays, well, we have to think, what are they going between? They're going between us on the Morning Star, the Inquisition, one would have to assume, and some other party that we could potentially be at conflict with, but might strike up a tentative truce to work alongside. Who could that be with the current state of Darktide? Now, we do have one other really good piece of information to throw in at this point, and that is we have a conflict that's ongoing in Darktide. We have something that we might need an intermediary for, and that is the current in-game event called Stolen Rations. Stolen Rations, if you haven't played it yet, just is an event where you are required to go into missions and collect rations that have been stolen from a convoy. These rations have then been tainted by the enemy, and you can either choose to recover or destroy them. Turns out, though, that either way you do things, the enemies are going to be really, really pissed, and the population of Tertium is going to be really, really pissed. If you destroy the rations, they see that as you taking food out of their mouths, and they uprise. It draws out more captains, and more Mobian 21st, and more just general militia-type enemies. If you feed the rations to the public, feed the rations to people, well, then they break out in more bouts of plague, and you get more mutated enemies as plague ogrins, and all sorts of mutants are bound. So really, either way we choose in this event, which, first of all, is a very unique thing. We've never had this in an event before. It seems like we're just kind of putting it into a bad situation, right? Perhaps we might need the help of some other forces in order to smooth the situation over, in order to navigate our way out of this crisis, which seems to be spreading. It seems like unrest is spreading through the Hive City regardless of what actions we take from high above in the Morning Star. And that's where I think we might need the help of some boots on the ground. That's right, when you got civil unrest like this, when you've got people who are starving or defecting to the enemy's cause, what you really need is people who know them and know their plight and are in tune with the environment in order to navigate this situation. It's the reason why when America goes abroad and spreads freedom, we usually ally with local forces in order to, not piss the locals off as much as we would normally do. And that's why I think that this class, the Broker, is potentially a ganger. Now, a ganger is just a very 40k way of saying street gang member, and these gangs within Hive cities are incredibly prolific. There are absolutely tons of them, and they hold a lot of power and influence. You might think that the rich noble families would hold control over the city, but generally those noble families, like the Margraves in the case of Tertium, stick to the upper spires in the upper city where there's actually, clean air and water and food. But most of our operations, including the operations that we've been doing to recover these rations, are taking place in the depths, way deep down in the sump pumps, and that is where we know for a fact that the Water Cartel, a very prolific gang that has had a lot of lore implications with Zola's backstory, are absolutely still active. And that means that there must be gangs operating down here. Now, another very popular piece of 40k media that has shown gangs in Hive cities is Necromunda, and Necromunda really gives a great look into the interplay between gangs and the power that they have, because effectively gangs act as the local government. They get resources and materials for their people who would otherwise starve and die, and they can even act as a local police force, because God knows the people in the spires up top of the city aren't going to help protect their people from plague or Xenos incursion or whatever the hell it might be. And that is exactly why these gangs would be eager to make a deal right now, why they would need a broker, why they would need to offer up some of their members to go and work with the Inquisition. Because think about it, things are going from bad to worse. The Mobian Sixth, as well as the outbreak of plague caused by the Cult of Admonition, is getting more and more prevalent by the day. They are losing territory to these warbands and to the disease, and there's a lot of power on the line for those who are willing to cut a deal with the Inquisition. Everybody in the Hive City that can see the sky, can see the Void Ship floating up there, that can see the Morning Star. They know there are strike teams being deployed on a daily basis. And now the Arbites are on the scene, and they are starting to enforce the Lex, which means that it is high time to start playing by the rules a little bit more and secure yourself a privileged position. In fact, whichever gangs are willing to bend the knee and make a deal with the Inquisition are likely to get a huge bump in resources and power that once the Inquisition moves away from the planet, they will be set well ahead of all their adversaries in terms of ruling the underworld for probably generations. So it behooves them to offer recruits, to offer seasoned gang members to help the Inquisition be successful, because they're going to be rewarded many more times over in kind. And this also is a deal that would make a ton of sense for the Inquisition to make, because it's very obvious that they're not turning up their nose at recruiting criminals, considering every single Ogren, Zealot, Veteran, and Psyker are all convicted criminals. They also would love to have people who are knowledgeable about the conditions on the ground, and they know people, they know the enemies they're fighting, they know the streets they're fighting in, and that means that these are perfect soldiers for the war that they're fighting. And they're also honestly pretty dang good soldiers just from a martial perspective as well. It's a thing that's explored very heavily in lore, but many chapters of Astartes actually recruit from Hive cities and from gangs in particular, because these are people who are raised in absolute devastation and conflict every single day of their lives, and they certainly know how to take a life and shoot a gun, let's say. So let's put it all together, everything so far, with a nice neat bow on top, so hopefully you can see big picture like I do why the ganger is in fact the broker that we've been hearing about. And it all starts with the story that's currently being told. We are currently in a conflict the likes of which the Inquisition has not seen so far. The conflict with the stolen rations is one that kind of risks a civilian uprising. It seems that no matter whether we destroy the rations or collect the rations, we are pissing off the populace, and it's causing more discord, more unrest. And at the point where this class is going to be revealed on the 11th, well, we will have been fighting this conflict for 3 weeks with no sign of it slowing, which means that the Inquisition is probably well aware that they're risking a full-on civilian uprising, which would be absolute worst-case scenario, right? That would be pushing all of these civilian populace that are already at their wits' end into the open waiting arms of the Cult of Admonition and the Mobian Six. You're literally just printing more enemies for yourself to fight if you're going to go about that route, which means that their normal tactics being deploying shock troops to go and murder everybody, are clearly not working. They need to develop a new strategy or get some new allies, which is our new class, in order to navigate the situation. And that means we need to look for a group who also wants to make this alliance. And that's where our hive gangs come in. The hive gangs are almost uniquely positioned to be the solution to this problem, right? They are the existing local governmental structure. They have the power in the area. They have the resources and the boots on the ground in the area where this conflict is taking place. They would be well equipped to deal with this issue. They also have a lot to lose by not taking this deal and a lot to gain by taking it, because they are being hemmed in on 3 sides. They not only were already facing the Cult of Admonition and their disease, but now they had the press ganging and forced conscription of the Mobian Sixth, and now of course they've got the Arbites and the Lex that's breathing down their necks and probably beating them to death in the street for breaking the Imperial law. So all of those are reasons why they desperately will want to make a deal with the Inquisition and get themselves pardoned or clemency for their Lex breaking, and also get some resources, get some more manpower, and be able to fight back against the Mobian Six and the cult that are taking their people and taking their territory, and hopefully secure a better position for themselves going forward. So it's very, very advantageous for all of the players that are going on in this big game of chess right now. And I think that gangers and the Inquisition are just a match made in heaven. If I were a writer, I would be absolutely ecstatic to get to write for a ganger and see the interactions between them and the other members of the cast, especially because exploring those gangs is such a big part of many Hive City stories within the 40k universe. As one final piece of evidence, guys, and this isn't too much of anything, but there was a Darktide game, or a Darktide module for a tabletop game released earlier this year. And in that Darktide module, you actually go into the Hive, and you are interfacing with no less than a dozen or so different gangs in order to resolve this situation. So it is something that the writers behind Darktide have had approved enough in order to publish it into other material and media, and this was released in, I think, January or February of this year. So it's been a very, very recent development in terms of the Darktide storyline and timeline. You got to remember that overall the storyline has been paused for about a year or so, so that's relatively recent in terms of storyline evolutions, which means that it is definitely something that they are considering. And I'll leave you with one absolutely final thing that makes me very, very suspicious that we might be getting a ganger very soon. I want you to watch for this cut here.
This is a lore question. With the implication of the Inquisition isn't doing hot with pulling of the Nurgle infestation on the planet, pushing the arbitraries to step in, could this mean that maybe gangers or upper hive mind will be more involved with attempting to stem the tide of the Mobian Six?
Yeah. Maybe. No, I can't answer that, sorry.
Anything is possible.
Anything is possible, that is true.
This might just be my conspiracy brain talking, but that seems like a highly, highly suspicious cut there, Mr. Magnuson. Anyway, guys, that's all I have for you today. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already, if you want to catch that talk with Joe Plays Games and all the other Darktide content I have coming. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you soon.